Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Duncan Castles and I'm joined today by one of football's most insightful minds, Sunday Times football correspondent, author, football journalist of the year, and the man who this week outed Alex Ferguson as a chocolate buttons thief. Welcome back to the Transfers podcast, Jonathan Northcroft.
Sorry, Fergie, if you're listening. I'm really, really sorry.
You were aided and abetted by Kenny Dalglish in that particular piece of crime detection.
Yeah. To be fair, I think Kenny's mischief was behind that one. But I had a brilliant week last week where my week consisted of watching Kenny Dalglish in his new film, which is stunning, then talking to Kenny Dalglish and then writing about Kenny Dalglish. And sometimes the job's not bad, especially for someone who grew up in the late 70s, 80s, watching from afar this incredible Scottish player. And what a man Kenny is, and what a life he's had, what a career he's had. And I'd urge anyone to watch the film just for the football, if nothing else. Just watch it for the football. The human story is amazing as well, but my God, the football.
That very much came across from your interview in the Sunday Times, and I will be watching it. While we were preparing this podcast, you told me that you were up for speaking about anything except Aberdeen. which is a request I would normally respect until the BBC ran an article with the following first paragraph. Lutz Pfannenstiel once stole a penguin, spent 101 days in a Singapore jail accused of match fixing, modelled for Armani, and has now been appointed sporting director by Aberdeen.
Yeah, replacing Stephen Gunn, who used to work in the ticket office or something like that. But anyway, who did very well. I have to say, Stephen Gunn did do very well. But it's a different appointment by Aberdeen.
Yes, we'll move swiftly on from the second bottom club in the Scottish Premiership and their intriguing appointment of a sports director. And since we've addressed chocolate larceny and penguin pilfering, let's talk about what some are describing as a crime against football aesthetics. Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. We're a quarter of the way into the Premier League season. Arsenal are 4 points clear at the top of the league. Haven't conceded a goal in a month. They're the second highest scorers in the division, but an astonishing 11 of those have come from set pieces. Best defensive record by miles, just 3 goals conceded. Fewest shots faced. Best goalkeeping save ratio. Averaging basically 2/3 of an expected goal against per game. Only other one club in the Premier League, Newcastle, has less than 1 per game. But this is on the back of that £285 million gross expenditure on transfer fees alone in the summer. Is this what you expected Mikel Arteta to produce with the depth of investment and the depth of additions that he got to his squad in the summer?
Yes, it is. I think everything we're seeing in Arsenal is coming from the same place, and it's very much coming from Mikel Arteta. I've been writing about this, but in an era where coaches seek to control ever more the every aspect that they possibly can, I think Mikel is the absolute epitome of that approach. And every piece of Arsenal's strategy has been guided by his desire to minimise risk and to optimise, to chip away at those little margins to make Arsenal better. So starting with the transfer window, I mean, he did sign, one position. Yes, he went out and he acquired a player that they didn't have before, a type, which obviously was Victor Gyökeres. But in every other piece of recruitment he did wasn't aimed at changing the paradigm. It was just aimed at perfecting what he already had, or even not even perfecting it, just adding more of what to what was already there to give him more depth. So, if you look at, he goes and signs Mosquera because he felt Mosquera would be a slightly better backup centre-back than Jakub Kiwior. He signs Hincapie because he thinks Hincapie just gives him a slightly better depth on the left side of his defence, where he's got two options who are maybe less sort of defensive-minded and more inverted sort of fullbacks in Lewis Skelly and Calafiori. He adds Madueke just to give himself, not a different player, but just to give himself back up to Saka. Everything is just about chipping away at the margins. And then you look at the football they play. Now, the set pieces are getting the headlines because of the extraordinary percentage of Arsenal's goals that are now coming from pretty much the same corner kick every time, but that's another matter. And that obviously, set pieces and set piece coaching is a margin that you can work at in football, and you can, as a coach, add tall players to your squad, and you can set aside extra time to train these things, all of which Arsenal do with the analysis, etc., etc. But then you get to the very low number of goals they concede, the very low XG against, the very low number of threatening shots. If you look at the XG per shot, you find it's very, very low as well. And again, that stems from risk aversion. It stems from a style of football that's based around settled, safe possession, not trying to attack through the middle, playing what's been described as a sort of horseshoe style of football, where you circulate the ball, you push the opponents back gradually. Field tilt is hugely important to Arteta. I.e. you play in the opposition half. You're not necessarily creating chances, but you're pushing them back. You're circulating the ball from one wing to the other. You're not going through the middle because you don't want to lose the ball. You don't want to get transitioned upon or counter-attacked. And you wear people down. And that is, everything is coming together for him at the moment. But it all comes from this very determined, unromantic, you might say, strategic approach, almost to win the title by increments. What I would add to that is that I have my own ideas about what good aesthetics are in football, but I don't mind any approach that a coach takes in order to win, because that's their job. And at this stage of his project, I don't think Mikel Arteta's got any duty whatsoever to entertain us, to show us beauty. He just needs to win, and he is doing it very well at the moment. It's so far this season has been, did I expect it? Yeah. Did I expect it to be working quite so well? Probably not. So it's been a tour de force by Arteta so far.
Yeah, look, you highlight how little they're allowing the opposition, and also how little they're creating themselves. So that game against Crystal Palace with 2 days less recovery time for Palace at the weekend, they created just 0.92 of expected goals in the entire game. It barely had a shot for much of the first half, and end up with a back five to defend the 1-0 against a tired Crystal Palace. I think it's fascinating what the Pep Guardiola model, what Pep Guardiola's tutelage, what this positional control game has evolved or maybe devolved into, and that you see Arteta doing many things that Guardiola did towards the most successful part of his Manchester City reign, including playing with 4 centre-backs, and stacking the team with physical players. And it's gone from what was presented as being, and what was reported as being, the most beautiful, compelling football to watch, into, in this particular case, it really is utter control. I think, as you've outlined, the obsession is with stopping the opposition having any chance to score against them, and then an expectation that your superiority of players, personnel, and superiority of preparation, particularly in these set-piece constructions in the game, is going to be enough to win the matches.
100%. There were always two sides to the coin with positional play, and you got to think that it actually came from Johan Cruyff, who wasn't the defensive-minded person at all. But positional play flowed from his idea that you essentially dominate football matches by occupying the right spaces, and specifically in an era where teams were zonal marking because of Arrigo Sacchi, then you occupied the spaces between the zonal markers, the ones that the zones weren't covering. But the Cruyff idea also had elements of player agency and autonomy with total football, with allowing players like Cruyff himself to roam and create the game, and other players to respond and fill in. And Guardiola has always been using it as a tool for the attacking side of the game. You know, Guardiola has always hated the counter-attack and feared the counter-attack. But the point of his positional football was always to try and, how can I create chances? How can I construct attacks? How can I construct chances? And that's why you saw in peak Man City, you saw the same goal scored all the time, that back post tap in, usually Raheem Sterling or someone. But the other side to it is the control side of it. And I feel that someone like Arteta has taken that bit the most seriously. And he doesn't really, I don't think he asks himself, how do I create a chance? I think he asks himself, how do I dominate the opposition? How do I dominate territorially? How do I dominate in the sense that I'm minimizing chances against me? So I'm dominating them in the sense I'm strangling them, I'm giving them nothing. I think he uses that part of the philosophy. At the moment, you can look at PSG and see a coach there in Luis Enrique, who also came from this tradition. He's using it in an uber attacking sense because he's getting the positional structure, and then he's adding in so many rotations and sort of daring variations, like a fullback in Hakimi who ends up as a number 9, but it's all controlled, but it's attacking flourishes to it. So it's different interpretations of this philosophy that started off, I guess, in Barcelona and in Spain, and has spread out throughout football. And we're seeing, as I say, Arteta taking the control element the most seriously, and maybe someone like Enrique still trying to riff off the attacking possibilities. But all of them stem back to the idea that you can design football.
Last season, we saw Arsenal score a lot of set-piece goals in the first half of the season, and it dropped off dramatically. You mentioned that they're essentially scoring the same goal every time, or close to the same goal every time. Do you expect that to drop off again this season in the same way as it did last year? I mean, the 69% of all goals from set pieces is a remarkably high number.
Yeah, I do. I can't see how it can stay at this rate. But it may stay pretty high. What they've got is, it's easier said than done stopping a set piece in an era where VAR means that it's kind of hard for defenders to grapple with attackers.
Good point.
Too much. Yeah. And talking to set piece coaches, I've got a good friend who's a set piece coach actually in the women's game. But they will tell you that the most important element of a set piece, the two most important elements beyond what you design as a coach, is the ball deliverer and the first contact person. And in Declan Rice, they've got probably the best striker of a dead ball at the moment in the Premier League, who incredible pace but also trajectory gets on those whip deliveries. And then Saka's not bad from the other side, but Declan Rice he's Beckham-esque, if you want to put it that way. And then in Gabriel, they've got the best first contact player in the league as well. The variety of ways that he can win first contact. Sometimes he'll run round the back, sometimes he'll run the near post, but he's just one of those those players that's able to do it. I mean, it's one of the mysteries of football why some big players can do it, some big players could never seem to win the first contact. But anyway, Gabriel could do it. So they do have those two golden elements, and while they've got those things, I think teams will get better, you'd imagine, at counteracting. But I think there'll still be times when Rice delivers it so perfectly, and Gabriel is just so good at getting that contact that it can't be stopped.
And you note there the importance of legislation against grappling, and we have had this season the Premier League off its own back, bringing in a set of rules to try and reduce blocking and holding of players at corner kicks and free kicks, which it's probably not coincidental to the high rate of set-piece scoring that we've seen in the first few weeks of the season.
No, it gives an enormous advantage to the attacking team, because of that thing where they're running towards the direction of play, as it were. They get the run on a static set of opponents, so that will give them a jump advantage. And if you can't stop their jumps by sort of making body contact before the ball goes in the air, then it makes it very, very difficult. So maybe the Premier League are just trying to keep the goal ratios up, because actually, if you look, the goals have dropped anyway. Take away the set pieces, what would we be watching?
Are you surprised by how many teams are still playing primarily zonal against Arsenal, given what you've highlighted there, which is this precision delivery, quality of delivery from Declan Rice? So Arsenal know where the ball is going.
Yeah.
And the importance of Gabriel Magalhaes and being the first man to the ball. That would seem that a sensible counter strategy to that would be to try a form of man-to-man marking at set pieces rather than allow this chain gang movement that we see from Arsenal and at almost every dead ball.
Yeah, no, definitely. And also maybe clear the 6-yard box out a little bit to allow a goalkeeper to try and dominate it rather than just be a sitting duck. But for sure, I mean, look, there's another factor, and we're maybe at a bit of a moment in time in football, and it'll change. But we're also in an era where there aren't that many outstanding aerial players. There aren't that many outstanding centre halves at heading the ball, and that's because the profile of centre halves has changed over the last decade.
Decade of selection for ball playing centre halves.
Exactly. So I guess, if this sort of new era, if you want to call it that way, of more direct football and set pieces persists, then we will go back to seeing a selection in recruitment, when it comes to recruitment of centre halves, more of the looking at their profile in terms of aerial duels and those physical aspects, and less at their ball playing abilities. Because if you're gonna bang it over the opposition press, you actually don't need your centre backs to start building the play up anymore.
And do you think that is a factor in Arsenal doing so well this season, and that we've seen this general shift in the Premier League, which we'll talk more about later, towards direct football, towards long throws, towards concentrating on set piece goals, towards playing the ball long from the back in a way that we had almost disappeared over the last 4 or 5 seasons? Has Arteta been fortunate in that this is happening at the same time as he's quite intentionally and cleverly built this super strong defence that's resilient to that kind of football?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I know there's a bit of a kind of narrative around going, Arsenal's Arteta's been a clairvoyant and he's seen this coming. And I just think he's part of his thinking has been, when I talked about him trying to, win through the margins and optimise and control. Actually, I just think he represents a prevalent approach in football at the moment, which is to try and basically reduce risk, use, let's say, data to try and identify what the best plays are, and he's just part of that sort of thought process more than, let's say, an Arne Slot or a Pep Guardiola. But it's for sure in this kind of environment, Arsenal are really, really well equipped. They haven't, they're not the top scorers in the league.
No.
In fact, I think there's 5 or 6 teams that have scored the same amount of goals pretty much. It is a defensive record, and that defensive record comes, as I said before, from their ability to control games through safe possession. And they've got 2 outstanding centre backs, an outstanding right back in a defensive sense in Timber, and a very good goalkeeper. And a decent number 6. So, okay, they've got other great tools as well, but it's also the style of play. So I think Arsenal's position is also reflective of the failure of opponents, and maybe that's where they've benefited from the return to direct play, because Liverpool are struggling horribly against it at the moment. So that's a significant factor in how the league table looks.
Let's talk then about Liverpool and those horrible struggles. They started with 7 straight wins, if you ignore the Community Shield. They've now lost 5 of their last 6 games, and the final defeat, I think, fair to describe a truly shambolic 3-2 loss at Brentford. We're seeing another side to Arne Slot in terms of his ability to generate what could be described as excuses or could be described as rationalisations. But after the Brentford game, he came out and said, every game it's a different problem for us. Look, the last time you were on the podcast, you very astutely highlighted Liverpool's decision to make a more radical change to a title-winning squad in terms of recruitment than any Premier League champions before them. Know the numbers: £450 million gross spent on transfer fees. Lots of players moving out, lots of players moving in. Have FSG in that strategy, that was clearly a long-term strategy, and we discussed it in that I think it was July podcast, that they were taking the opportunity in the transfer market to build a squad that could dominate in English football over the next 5 seasons. Have they ended up landing Arne Slot with an unsolvable problem for this particular season?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's an element of Arne Slot in this as well, in terms of what he asked for, and then there's an element, as you'd mentioned, of FSG using the summer as the starting point to build something for 3, 4, 5 years, and I guess what we're seeing is the tension between creating a squad for the longer term, or doing a rebuild for the longer term, and then the need to win now. So I think of something like the first year of the Chelsea project, where they've brought in a huge number of 21, 22-year-olds, and then you saw the difficulties that Pochettino had, for example, in that first season, where it was towards the end it came together, but there were 6 months of real ups and downs. I think where FSG, or where Liverpool, Slot himself, have got it wrong, is underestimating how difficult it is to blend in new players when you're bringing them into a non-stable setup. And that surprises me, because I know from reading Ian Graham's book, I know from conversations with people around the FSG recruitment operation in the past, that they were always conscious that there was an ideal number of incomings that you would have in a transfer window, a summer transfer window, and then that would be no more than 3 or 4. It certainly wouldn't be 6 or 7. And I think what you're seeing is when you bring in 6 or 7 and the team then everything's in flux, you might have acquired talent, but the ability of that talent to then establish itself, to forge connections with other players, to do everything a new recruit needs to do to then start progressing is diminished. It's difficult, and that's what makes me wonder whether is the strategy wrong actually, because there's no point acquiring 7 players if 7 players can't bed in. It doesn't matter how good they are. While there might have been a market opportunity to make these signings, if those bits and pieces of your new design can't be fitted in, where does that leave you in a year's time? Does it leave you with talents that have actually regressed? Mm-hmm. So these are the worrying questions, I would say. But then on top of that, there is Slot's requirements or requests were to add to the attacking repertoire, because he was spooked by playing well against PSG but not being able to score more than 1 goal in the tie and ended up going out in penalties. He was spooked by being a bit impotent against Newcastle in the Carabao Cup final, and thought, well, teams are starting to, after the first half of last season where Liverpool were really successful at scoring goals, it became harder for them. Salah dropped off a little bit. Teams started to play in a lower block and go more direct against them. So he thought, well, I'll bring in a number 10. I'll increase the repertoire at the top of the pitch with a new striker, etc., etc. But my midfield and my centre backs are fine. Now, that's not necessarily looking the case, is it? Maybe the balance of the recruitment was wrong as well. And then I'm giving you a list here, but the final aspect is I just don't think they've recruited, or I don't think they've got it right in the fullback areas. I don't think their options are good enough. So there's a few things. There's an overall FSG strategy, maybe getting that slightly wrong. There's maybe Slot going for the wrong balance of signings, and then there's the specifics that maybe a couple of signings at this point in their careers aren't quite up to it.
It's fascinating because you mentioned Ian Graham there, who was, I think, head of data analysis, and wrote
Director of Research, I think was his title. But yes, that's essentially what he was. Yeah,
wrote this superb book on how to win the Premier League, which goes into great detail on the process he and Michael Edwards used to use analytics in tandem with traditional scouting to work out how players would fit into their team. That was the entire premise of the model was take measurements, fine-grained, detailed measurements and clever algorithmic devices to assess what their team was and how any given proposed recruit would fit into that team and improve it. And if he didn't improve it, then he wasn't signed. So they clearly spent a lot of time thinking about this entire process of specifically recruiting for a specific plan. How you get them into the team. Then you have Jurgen Klopp, who quite often spent months bedding players in, giving them very little playing time, but kind of instructing them in his tactical approach before he would expose them to high-level Premier League games. And that all seems to have gone out the window with this summer recruit. It's almost like they decided, well, we did all that in the past. We made it work, and now we're going to do a 2.0 version of it where we rip up half the team and expect our predicted model to produce a set of players who will combine well together. And I think you highlight it's not just about measuring what those players do in their previous team and then integrating them into the new team, Liverpool. There has to be that established system and set of relationships between the players that they're coming into. Otherwise, you run the risk of doing, it's early days yet, but you can see the process happening of Florian Wirtz, Alexander Isak, two of the highest transfer fees in history. The pressure ramping up on them because people are saying, you've made a mistake here. You spend too much money on the player. He's not going to deliver in the Premier League. And then you have that whole psychological pressure that the player has to deal with, which Liverpool were very good at avoiding in the past.
Very much so. I think this is where Arne Slot needs to come in as a coach and really lay down the priorities and the relationships and connections that he wants. So at the moment, we've gone from a team whose primary objective when it got the ball was for Trent Alexander-Arnold to release Mo Salah early. That was essentially, that was Liverpool's plan last year and for the previous 5 years or whatever. Now Trent's gone, so those passes aren't coming to Salah anymore. And maybe there's a question around, and I'm saying maybe because I'm not writing him off yet, but maybe there's a question around Salah. So maybe there's a question around Salah. I say maybe because there's been a rush to write him off, and I think it's just a little bit premature to do that. But for sure, that old game plan of early ball to Salah isn't there anymore. Then you've recruited Florian Wirtz, one of the best number 10s in football. I believe that. I've seen the talent. There is issues about him, adapting to the league, but you trust talent to be able to do that. But Florian Wirtz was the centre of the game plan at Leverkusen. And as a player who thrives on receiving the ball and inventing something that he sees, he needs the ball to come to him. But then you've got Alexander Isak, one of the best strikers in the world, thrived at Newcastle from counterattacks and crosses and pace out wide. He needs the ball. He needs the ball delivered in a certain way. And what Slot hasn't done so far is established. So what's the hierarchy here? What's the game plan? When we have the ball, are we still looking to Salah? Are we looking to Wirtz first of all? Or is our strategy, let's do everything we can and the end point is a cross to Isak or a through ball to Isak, however you feel Isak needs to be used, right? That's where these players need him to step in and provide guidance. And also, there has to be the organic element where you allow connections between players to form. What's the new Trent to Salah connection? Now I think, for example, Szoboszlai and Wirtz have really combined well in moments. They're on the same wavelength, those two. So you maybe need to start building around those relationships. They really need someone to forge a relationship with Isak when he's back, and they really need Salah to start forging different relationships because he doesn't have a Trent. So this is where it's all complicated, but this is where the coach, I think, has to decide, what does a Liverpool goal look like? What does our possession look like? Where's who's it going to, and who are the players that I need to get in proximity to connect with each other for the thing to work? And so far we haven't seen that. It does rather feel like it's been 4 or 5 different plans. None of them have really worked. There's been an element of just hoping things come together. And okay, Arne Slot did an amazing job last year. He started the season well. He's had a really difficult month. Again, I wouldn't write him off just yet, but now's the time he needs to provide these answers to the players. Otherwise, that, to your point about them feeling under pressure and finding it difficult to bed in, that'll only get more difficult for them unless he can start giving them some solutions.
So they don't have a coherent way of attacking. They've lost that from last season.
I think so.
They're also much weaker in defence. The numbers demonstrate that. I think 19 goals conceded against 5 at the same stage last season. We've talked about the errors in this transfer process. There seems to have been a big error over Mark Gehi. I think when we did that podcast in July, I think the headline item was that Liverpool had focused their attentions on Gehi as the centre-back they wanted to bring in. We detailed that their strategy was to run it down towards the end of the window because they knew that the player wanted to come to them and they believed that Crystal Palace would sell. They followed that strategy. Crystal Palace were initially asking for £45 million for the player. Liverpool didn't make an official offer until August the 30th. They ended up agreeing a fee on deadline day, £35 million plus 10%. So from a financial perspective, the running that down worked. But as we know, Crystal Palace failed to get a replacement. In this case, Brighton centre-back Igor on loan they were trying to get. And their situation with their coach was such that he insisted that Gehi wouldn't be allowed to move, even though he'd already been involved in a medical at Liverpool. How much of a difference would getting that Gehi deal through, and let's not just say at the end of the window for the sake of saving the £10 million, let's say they'd done it early in the window and given Palace the money they wanted. They had the player there and they were able to build a defence with Van Dijk and Gehi in it rather than Van Dijk and Ibrahima Konate, who just does not look like the best version of himself. I think at the weekend we saw him running back with Kevin Schade as Brentford scored one of their goals and just giving up on the Brentford striker running through and allowing him an unchallenged shot at goal. Personnel-wise, Liverpool seem to have created a huge problem for themselves in defence.
They have. I mean, I have to say, I think that Konate hasn't started the season well, but I don't see him or centre-back as being the biggest issue, because I think some of the desperate defensive situations he's being exposed to are down to lack of protection in midfield and two fullbacks who, in my mind, just are struggling. You know, Kirkes and Bradley struggling positionally to defend, just not quite at this point in time secure. Andy Robertson, when he's played, has settled things down and made things a bit better. So I do think the centre backs are being stressed. There's a stress situation that they're facing. Maybe Van Dijk's not been at his best as well, so that exposes Konate. But for sure, in terms of the kind of big picture, they I think have made a mistake in not getting Gehi. Clearly, they were playing two different games of poker at the same time, one over Isak and one over Gehi. And then, of course, Crystal Palace were doing the same. And this is where being a transfer operator, a sporting director, is more than just about working out where the talent is. It's working out the strategies to get them, how to play the game, as it were. And maybe they've got it wrong. Because by focusing on Isak, or by assuming that Crystal Palace were going to behave in a certain way, they made a certain decision to go very late on Gehi and get him for a price that they thought was the best price. They maybe miscalculated from a Palace point of view the situation on Eze, who the moment Eze went to Arsenal, it became a lot more complicated to get Gehi. And then there's the Oliver Glasner situation where they maybe, this is where it's so complicated, as I say, in recruitment. You've got to try and work out how other clubs are going to behave and what's the political situation at another club. How good are Palace going to be? How successful are Palace going to be at recruiting themselves? one of the issues that Liverpool faced was that Palace weren't very successful in identifying or being able to recruit, and that's why Glasner got upset, and that's why Gahey ended up staying. They had a similar problem with Newcastle, where again they were waiting for Newcastle to recruit, and waiting, and that's what complicated Isak. So it's really complex, and they've got the wrong outcome with Gahey. Could have possibly solved it by offering a bit more money earlier in the window. He'd be a great asset for them going forward. He'd probably be a bit of an upgrade on how Konate's played so far. But to go back to your point, would it have solved everything? No, because the structural problems in the team and the particular issues in defence with the fullbacks would still be there.
Yeah. Well, it could be worse for Liverpool. They could still have Brendan Rodgers in charge. Interesting week at Celtic, and interesting description for Dermot Desmond of Brendan. For anyone who hasn't seen it yet, have a look at it.
I like Brendan. But it's a great soap opera, isn't it?
I think Dermot Desmond used to like Brendan as well, from what I understand. Let's move to Manchester United, one of the clubs that Brendan Rodgers had targeted as a future club for himself to manage. We're actually a couple of days away from 1 year of Ruben Amorim at Old Trafford, and he's managed to come into that anniversary of his arrival with 3 wins in a row for the first time in his tenure at the club. Sunderland 2-0 at home. The most telling one, Liverpool 2-1 away, and then Brighton 4-2 at the weekend, which was also United's first home win over Brighton since 2022, which is telling in itself. Amorim was talking about how they'd had a little bit of luck again. Said like last week we had a little bit of luck. Has he finally delivered Manchester United with a football team?
Look, let's not get carried away, but at the same time, let's give the guy a bit of credit, because I've been critical of him until the last 3 games, and I was at Brentford when they got well beaten, and he sort of seemed to have nothing to offer at all in the post-match press conference, and at that point I wondered whether he'd see out the anniversary, but I think all along with Amorim, I've been thinking, show me something, show us it. There's so much based around the theory that this system's going to work, the theory that he's this great young coach, the theory that he's this sort of nice guy that's going to do well with man management. You do need to see evidence. The football club needs to see evidence. The players need to see evidence. And while I absolutely admire the trust that Manchester United fans always have in their managers, it's a real strength of them as a trait, the backing. From the outside, to me, until the last 3 games, it has looked sort of, well, what are you backing it up with? But we have seen an uptick, without a doubt. Clearly, this is... Let's just take a step back. We're talking about one of the world's great football clubs. And if we're really saying that on the basis of 3 wins, everything's great again, that does show you how far Man United have fallen, right? Because what that football club really needs is to have 2-3 months of playing like this. Of winning convincingly. And then I'd say to you, well, actually, there was a 3-month period when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was doing this, so it needs more. So it's the start of a journey, but there is something there to build on. To me, the how much is coaching, how much is talent. The players that they've recruited are good. Brian Mbeumo's good. Matheus Cunha's good, and that's elevated Manchester United, because there's not been this really sounds simplistic, but there just hasn't been enough good players in that team for a long time. So there's a couple more good players, and they're starting to work out. I think Šeško is behind those other 2, but is starting to show elements of where he's an improvement on Rasmus Højlund. And the bit that you need to give Amorim credit for is they look really fit at the moment. They're playing quicker. They're a bit closer together. The players, the gaps are gone, which is coaching. He's got a settled midfield in Casemiro and Fernandes at the moment, which, you know, midfield's been such a weakness for United over the last few years. It looks a bit better. And there's something there. I thought the Brighton win was really important because, you know, Sunderland was beating a promoted team. They've done that consistently. Winning at Liverpool was a great result, but actually, if you think back over Erik ten Hag's reign and even Solskjaer's reign, the odd win against the big rivals did happen.
Yeah.
To me, it's a Brighton game. It's like, okay, you've then, on top of that, been able to produce a pretty decent performance, forget the result, but a pretty decent performance against a good football team who's always caused you trouble. And then, you know, with the new signings scoring. So yeah, there is the start of something there. I'm not eating my hat yet, but, you know, I might have to just step back a little bit and give Amorim a bit more time than a month ago I thought he deserved.
Yes, look, I think you're right to highlight the fitness. He did talk about how this season they would benefit from extra training time, and I think we're seeing that. He's got a new organisation in defence, where he's making those two number 10s, inside number 10s, come back and form a 5-4-1 when they're out of possession. And yeah, he's always talked about how much he wants the players to run, how much he needs the players to run. And I think we're seeing that now, in that he's getting them to run, and it's making a difference to what is still a weak defensive team and still a fragile side. And I think it was interesting about against Brighton that they get to 3-0 with some fortunate calls in the process, which even Amorim would recognise, and he starts to bring on his reserves to give them playing time, and that's when things start to fall apart, and then you get the nervousness and the psychological pressure that's involved with, and the doubts in the stadium, and almost threw it away. But there's a clear improvement there. It's an interesting interview from Jim Ratcliffe recently ahead of all of this, kind of in the point of maximum concern for Amorim, with the Times, mainly a business interview, but he was asked about Manchester United, and Ratcliffe made a direct comparison between Amorim's first year at Manchester United and Alex Ferguson's first year at Old Trafford, and said, I remember the clamouring for Alex Ferguson to be fired in his first 2 years. Half the press would have fired Alex Ferguson then. Yeah,
right. Jim's history and memories as a Manchester United fan, I find curious sometimes. Right, I'm just gonna leave it at that. Right, this diehard fan. Okay, the first 2 years of Ferguson, the press weren't clamouring for him to go. He finished second in his second year, if I'm right. The pressure came after the first 2 years, actually, when they got into year 3, and there was a real sort of slump and toil in the league, and it didn't feel like things were really improving, and that's when the cup run, the famous cup run, did it save him or did it not? Well, you know, Bobby Charlton and Martin Edwards always said no, we were going to back him anyway, but it's always about the detail, isn't it? Fergie from the start was focusing on the youth system. One of the very first signings he made, if you like, was to go round to a young Ryan Giggs' house and persuade him, sit down with his mum and persuade this talented kid who Manchester City wanted as well, that his future lay in joining United's academy. He did that in his first month, right? He was making good recruits. You know, Steve Bruce brought Mark Hughes back, brought in Brian McClare. So there was that. I think the idea that Fergie came in and it was awful, and he's had 3 years of it being awful, and then suddenly he beat Notts Forest in the cup. It wasn't like that. He did, and also Alex Ferguson arrived at Manchester United after 10 years of high achievement in management, really, relatively, after beating Real Madrid in a European final, after winning multiple titles in a place where, possibly getting my little Aberdeen bonnet on again. But what he did in Scotland was greater than what Ruben Amorim did in Portugal.
Yeah.
Okay. So he also arrived with a bigger body of evidence behind him. So I know the point Ratcliffe's making, right? I don't want to be obtuse and insulting towards him. He's making, I think his whole interview was based around the idea that as a leader of a football club, I can't listen to the noise. I can't listen to press clamour. I've got to go my own way. And that's totally 100% admirable. Fair play. And the backing for Amorim has been consistent from his executives, okay? So the people he's put in charge, Omar Barada and Jason Wilcox, very much behind this guy. So that's good. That's good ownership. I think it's a bit rewriting history to say, well, the first couple of years of Arteta were the same at Arsenal and the first couple of years of Fergie were the same. That's simplistic. It's not quite like that. And my point with Amorim was that in the Arteta or Fergie examples, you could see, and Klopp, let's say, is the early couple of years at Liverpool, you could see something. You could see where the guy was going, and it was up and down results wise, but there was something underlying that you could see. And until recently, I haven't seen that with Amorim. But it's to be fair, there's the green shoots now.
The headline of that interview was that Ratcliffe was backing Amorim for the full 3 years of his contract. I think watching it is intriguing because when he's first asked, the question is, so Amorim gets the rest of the season, and his reply is, he's a good guy, and he has to be forced to come out with that 3-year answer and then reference Arteta, which I think, again, you mentioned the detail of Alex Ferguson. I think it's always interesting to actually watch these interviews, especially when they're available on video, and look at the faces and look at how the questions are posed. And in the same interview, we have Ratcliffe indicating his support for Nigel Farage and arguing that what's wrong with the UK economy is that the government needs to look out after the richest 1% of the people in the UK. So
he says from Monaco.
Indeed. But let's leave Manchester United and move across the city to what Pep Guardiola might refer to as the Erling Haaland team if he wasn't responsible for creating it. 462.5 million euros of transfer fee commitments across the last 2 transfer windows, which is the highest net spend in the football world over that period of time. And we have a team in which Erling Haaland has scored 6 of their 7 goals this month, 11 Premier League goals in total. They only have 4 other players who've scored 1 goal each. So 5 scorers in total and 11 coming from Haaland. Guardiola asked about his squad last month, said, I would love to have the players of 8, 7, 6 years ago, but it's impossible. It's very interesting to see what answers Guardiola is putting up to the questions that are being posed of him, having to rebuild that Manchester City side and for the first time in his entire career, not having the most talented squad in the division.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe going back to an approach that's not based around quite so much his coaching blueprint or anything more complicated really than getting the ball to their most effective player. It's quite interesting. I'm inclined to give Guardiola just all the kind of rope at the moment, because I just like the odyssey that he's gone on. It's almost like I've done the dominating football bit, right? I've kind of, I've solved football. I've dominated. I've had the best teams. I've created the best teams. I'm now going to go back and see if there's a different way to do it. And he's a very curious. I say curious in the sense he's got curiosity as a person. Mm-hmm. You get the impression he's kind of quite enjoying this. I wonder what would happen if I kind of just had a brilliant striker and started just getting the ball to him quickly. So yeah, it's a different Man City. You're absolutely right to highlight though the outlay that on this squad over the last 2 transfer windows. And one of the things that really grabbed my attention in their defeat against Aston Villa was the makeup of that front 6, where they, as a holding midfielder or as a number 6, if you like, they had Reinders. Nico Gonzalez was on the bench. Obviously, Rodri's injured at the moment, and then you had Marmoush and you had Cherki again on the bench. And actually, when you look at the team that they had, in terms of players that have been signed in those last 2 windows, Reinders and Donnarumma in goal. They were the only 2. So this is a team that's out of that 450 million is only being able to put one outfield player on the pitch, which maybe just tells you a story about how the recruitment has dropped off at City from being able to sign, I don't know, the Ruben Dias's and the Bernardo Silvas, who the Gvardiols who just go straight into the team, the Haalands, to players on that sort of second tier that aren't, not bad players, but maybe just not those sure bets anymore. You've got, Marmoush is an interesting example. Really decent player, but he looked really effective for 5 or 6 games when he joined in January. He now seems to have kind of fallen back into the Julian Alvarez role of being a bit of a backup forward, multi-purpose forward. Nico Gonzalez just has failed to replace Rodri. I know Kushinov's injured, but Vitor Reis, the other centre-back they signed in January, on loan already. I think Cherki you give a bye to because he's had his injury issues and he's still come into it. But the point I'm making is that none of those recruits, and before them maybe Doku and Savinho, none of them have ended up, none of them to date have been as successful as the group of recruits that came just before them, which did include the Haalands and the Guardiols and the Bernardos, if you want to go further back. So that's telling you a story about where City are in the pecking order at the moment.
Yeah, so it's a huge spend, but an ineffective spend so far, and some of the stuff has been flagged up to me when the players were coming in. So Vitor Reis and Kusanov, both of them, I was told, would not make it as Manchester City starting centre-backs. So the idea was if you took the abilities of each of them and combined them into one player, then you would have a Manchester City starting centre-back. But the feeling was that was a bad deal. Nico Gonzalez was not a number 6. He was signed to play that number 6 role, but has not properly been a number 6 in his career before. So I think not a great surprise that hasn't worked. If you look at the background, obviously there's been huge change at City in terms of the football structure of individuals who recruit. The Cheeky Bergiristan, obviously the most important one, who retired, replaced by Hugo Viana from Sporting. Omar Barada, who wasn't choosing players but was involved in the negotiation process for players, which was working with great ammunition, but often done very successfully at City. But also other individuals in the background, for example, the City Football Group's Director of Football Data, Laurie Shaw, moved to Liverpool in April. Jamie Smith, a long-time Director of Scouting and Recruitment, left for Everton after 11 years at the club. There's a number of other individuals who've changed in there. And the first summer, the first year of recruitment doesn't reflect... Well, it reflects well on the previous team, let's put it that way. And it's interesting that that Guardiola doesn't really seem to have a solution to this problem other than to focus on his very best player and try and get the ball to him as quickly as possible.
Yeah, which is actually maybe his best plan. Let's be honest. If your tools aren't good enough, you have to use what your best weapons are, and I would say that is Haaland at the moment. But clearly, it's too reliant on him right now. When you look at a setup behind Haaland, which is Oscar, Bob, Foden, Bernardo Silva, and Savinho, and Reinders as a group of five behind. I mean, you don't need to be a educated coach to kind of understand that's a funny game plan. There's a lack of balance there. There's a sort of oddness to that, right? So that doesn't look quite right. It is new territory for Pep. A sort of senior person in recruitment at another big club had said to me in the summer that this is new territory for Manchester City. They are used to being able to get more or less the number one target in each position, and now they're behind others in the queue, and they used the example of Florian Wirtz, where that's who City wanted. They end up getting Cherki. This is different territory for Guardiola. This is different territory for City. No longer getting the number one. We've always asked the question: what does Pep look like when he doesn't have the best squad? And we're seeing it. But as I mentioned, I quite like the fact that he is, he's not complaining. He's embracing it. He's interested in it. I don't think he's come up with the right solutions and balances just yet. But maybe they're doing a bit better than Liverpool at the moment. So, it's not bad. If we're going to circle round to do I see City winning the title, I don't suppose I do really though. And you wonder how many years of not winning the title City and Guardiola are willing to go to, because that's something unprecedented as well.
Yeah, for all we've seen this different Pep Guardiola, it would be a very, very different Pep Guardiola if he sat happily not winning the title and then experimenting with using other people's tactics, like five at the back at Arsenal, for an indefinite period of time. Doesn't really seem to fit his personality.
No. Well, I mean, I'm a similar age to Pep. I think you are too, Duncan. And you start to, I don't know, you crave a bit of variety in your middle age, and you wonder what different things are like. So maybe this is his equivalent of buying a motorbike.
Next job, move to a relegation battling team for...
Yeah. Next job, saving Wolves. Pep 0.20.
Last time you were on the Transfers podcast, you also highlighted the manner in which the Premier League's wealthiest clubs were stripping performing upstart clubs like Bournemouth, Brighton and Brentford of their best talent, which we saw in spades during the rest of that summer. Yet 9 games into the season, we've got Bournemouth second in the Premier League. Brighton mid-table and probably disappointed to be mid-table, and Brentford a very relieved 11th, but a comfortable 11th, and just off taking Liverpool apart at home. And we also have newly promoted Sunderland in 4th after an away win at Chelsea that was not a fortunate win, and just a well executed, competent deployment of the players that were available to them. Why do you think, even after having their best players or many of their best players removed from them, these so-called lesser clubs are still performing so strongly this season?
Well, this is the evidence that of how brilliantly engineered and run these football clubs are. And I'm feeling slightly foolish that I didn't have more faith in them, particularly in the case of Brentford. I'm surprised Bournemouth are second, but I think Iraola is so outstanding, and they did keep probably their best attacker. They did in Semenyo, so I'm not surprised there's good continuity there. In the case of Brentford, though, I thought, how can they operate without Thomas Frank, without Brian Mbeumo, without Johan Wissa, without Christian Norgard, their captain? How does that work? And the decision the club made to appoint Keith Andrews, again, was questioned. But actually, when you take a step back, you think, well, should we have questioned it? Because this is a club that's been consistently making unorthodox but good decisions for almost a decade now, and they've done it again. And I look at something like the recruitment of Dango Ouattara, which again I thought, well, 42 million, are you serious? But actually works perfectly in the game plan, is doing really well. And then the players there that have, they a bit like Brighton, Brentford, and obviously it's very similar models, but Brentford are pretty good at bringing in players, but not expecting them to produce straight away, bringing someone in who is going to be good in 6 months' time, bringing someone in January who doesn't really start playing brilliantly until the following season, or even someone that takes a year and is then good. And then you look at Igor Thiago, who is coming good now, or Kevin Schade, been at a football club for a while, but have been allowed to kind of bed in slowly. Really good. Michael Cody's a tremendous signing. Of course, you got that again. That's a fantastic recruitment. So it's just showing how well these football clubs are structured or coached. I'd add in Palace, Glasner and his ability to keep things going, and they've retained good players, of course, in Wharton and Mateta and Gehi. But these clubs they're just serious, really well run football clubs who are starting to see them now resistant. They're kind of stress resistant to the point where you can remove even their coaches or their best players and they can still flourish.
So Brentford, as we discussed in the podcast, when they made that decision to promote Keith Andrews from set piece coach to manager, first time in his career, they interviewed a lot of very well regarded external candidates, and decided that continuity was the key thing, and I think that has just been so well demonstrated in the way they're playing. It's a very precise evolution of what they were doing under Thomas Frank, with, as you say, clever recruits to fill in the holes created by having Mbeumo and Wissa force exits out. Bournemouth over £200 million raised in transfer fees, but cleverly retained Antoine Semenyo, despite offers from Manchester United and other clubs in the Premier League to take him, and then started adding more high quality recruits from overseas, like Adrien Truffert, who's had the kind of start to the season that I thought he might have, having seen him play in European football elsewhere in the past. I wonder how much of this strength of the mid-tier clubs comes down to the economic strength of the Premier League now. We went through a window where Premier League spent €3.6 billion gross on transfer fees in the summer, which was 3 times what Serie A spent, 4 times what the Bundesliga spent, more than 5 times what La Liga spent, and same for Liga. All of those leagues, apart from Serie A, took more in transfer fees than they spent. Serie A's net spend was 80 million euros, which was half of what Sunderland spent as a promoted club from the Championship. Sunderland actually outspent Real Madrid in the summer.
Wow.
Is it the case that once you've got these intelligently structured clubs with good recruitment models and the ability to take unconventional decisions like Brentford have done, like Brighton have done, if you give them the resource by dint of being in the Premier League, that they can outcompete just about every other European club, that this is what you end up with, because these mid-tier clubs can afford to lose their best talent and then just reapply that clever recruitment policy on a pool of players that they didn't have access to 2-3 years ago when the economic imbalance wasn't so greatly in the Premier League's favour.
Yeah, I think so. It stands to reason, doesn't it? Where we've seen these clubs, this tier of clubs. I don't want to use the kind of old cliche, but they were shopping in Tesco and they were shopping really cleverly, right? But now that economic might is allowing them to shop in better stores, and lo and behold, the same cleverness and analysis is allowing them to do better. I mean, I'm just glancing at the list of top 50 transfers this summer on Transfermarkt, and I mean, it is just absolutely dominated by Premier League transfers, and the kind of ones you almost forget about, like Jacob Ramsey going to Newcastle and Amari Hutchison going into Nottingham Forest, and Kevin signing for
and not being selected for their Europa League squad.
These are all in the top 50 transfers in world football in the summer. You know what I mean? I mean, Anthony Elanga is in the top 20 going to Newcastle. It is just an ability, a flexing of muscle that I don't know where European clubs go. I mean, the only 2 non-Premier League transfers are Real Madrid signing Trent Alexander-Arnold in terms of market value, with one of the highest market values. But of course, the fee was only 10 million. But in terms of market values, he was right up there in the top 10. And then, Victor Osimhen to Galatasaray. But I mean, this is precisely why. This is precisely why somewhere in Fiorentino, is Perez's office, there's still a big folder saying European Super League, and nobody can tear it out of his hands, because otherwise the Premier League just continues year on year. Year on year, give Brentford and Brighton and Bournemouth this year on year on year. Where do they get to in 10 years' time compared to the European opposition?
How much of this comes down also to tactical changes in the way the Premier League is being played? The impact of analytics, the impact of choosing to use different ways to compete against opponents. We kind of went through a period in the Premier League where everyone tried to play like Manchester City because that was supposedly the optimal way to play football, and Pep Guardiola sat back and said, yes, please, I will always beat you, or 9 times out of 10 I will beat you if you try and play the same way as me, because I've got better players than you. And that seems to have been jettisoned by the majority of Premier League clubs now.
Yes, but it's still coming, as you identified, that particular style's been jettisoned, but the thought process is the same. The thought process is what is optimal, and can we copy it? Yeah. So at the moment, what is optimal is going direct. it's beating positional play by man-to-man pressing and going direct. What is optimal? Set pieces. Let's do that. So it's all still coming from the same play, and you could call it the corporatization of football, because you see this is how corporations work. This is how economics works, where an industry identifies what best practice is, and then everyone invests in it and follows it, because what the people who put money into things want is to know that there's their money's got the best chance possible of going to good use. So, you don't leave things to chance, and that's why positional play was seen as optimal, and at the moment a different way. But to add into all of that as well, you can't ignore the continued advances in athleticism, where that's just the boundaries continue to be pushed. It's off the scale in the Premier League compared to everything else. I was at Chelsea, Liverpool last month, and the first 20 minutes, I was sitting as you know from doing match reports, Duncan, that first 20 minutes is your chance before you have to write anything, a chance to look at the patterns, the tactics, the dynamics of a game. And I was just looking at lots of men running around going, what am I looking at? What am I looking at? Balls pinging everywhere. The intensity is just insane. And that's the other thing that's pushing us at the moment maybe towards more set piece goals, because it's very hard to do anything in open play when no one lets up until maybe the 75th minute.
No one gives you any time to play the ball.
No.
You're looking at some statistics ahead of this, and then comparing last season, the Premier League, with 2019-20 season, the overall running distance up 6%, which is a fair improvement, but not a massive one. Sprints, however, up 19%, and the distance sprinted up 22%. It's just underlines that increase in athleticism. And obviously you combine that with what we've just been talking about, the focus on overseas talent and the ability to pick off pretty much the best players in the world. And also, if you're focused on athleticism as the primary trait, you maybe go for a slightly different pool of player than Real Madrid would be going for. So you can use that Premier League advantage to get into the super athletic players that you need in the division, and then you evolve into this process that you describe of everyone having a team that's optimized for running, apart from West Ham United.
Yeah, maybe are they the clever outliers who are sort of saying we'll be the disruptors? We're going to do something different. We're not going to run at all. We're not going to have any plan whatsoever. Yeah, maybe they'll be really clever in the long term, in League One or whatever. That's exactly it. There's also the profile of who a Premier League player is may actually be becoming slightly different to the profile in other leagues, albeit if we consider PSG right now to be the epitome of football, I mean that is an insane athletic team. That's a team that plays at an extraordinary intensity. Intentionally so. If you look at the evolution of that PSG team, they got rid of the superstar players like Neymar, Lionel Messi, who were not running, and having conversations with people involved in that process, there was no chance of us winning the Champions League when we had three players who did not do any running. So we had to get younger and we had to get more athletic, and then focus on athletic young players who had supreme technical skills and bring a coach in who could do the kind of things you were talking about in terms of giving them a way of playing that took advantage of all of that. That's right. And then I think they're in a unique position because we've waited for years for French teams to actually maximise French talent. And now you're seeing, because everything you described there also speaks perfectly to the profile of talent that comes out of the Paris area, the amount of incredibly brilliant young footballers, but athletic players as well. You think about the players they've produced over the years. PSG are bringing it together now. They're getting those players and getting them into their team at a young age. So yeah, there's a synthesis there. But when you the top clubs in Europe, it's they if they're going to compete regularly with Premier League clubs, they need to find their own sort of solutions, because I don't see how just trying to do what the Premier League does in terms of let's try and buy who we can. Maybe for Real Madrid, maybe for Bayern Munich to a point, but everyone else, how are they going to compete?
Let's finish with hero and villain, as ever. I'll let you choose your hero of the week or month, if you like, Johnny.
Well, here's recency bias in action for you, right? And I was actually, first of all, I'm going to apologise to Matty Cash, because I was going to give you a kind of slightly odd answer where I was going to choose Matty Cash for his goal against Manchester City, simply because God loves a trier, don't they? And I just think, like, Matty Cash is one of those players that you always think, is he really any good? But you know what a great career he's had, and he keeps operating in a successful team, and then to score that goal with his wrong foot, fair play Matty Cash. But anyway, I'm not choosing him. I'm choosing Dimitar Berbatov, because this morning he's released Rio Ferdinand's released his latest sort of podcast interview, and it's with Berba, and it's just we've been talking a lot about the football's move towards being a sort of power athlete game, towards being a kind of controlled, systematized, structured game where agency's taken away from the players. And you've just got Berbatov there, sitting there, cool as you like, even now, sort of talking about how he didn't really play to win. He played for those moments where he'd get on the ball and he'd turn someone, and then he'd pause and the crowd would go, oh. And he says that for me was better than any victory or any goal. And of course, football, if everyone played it like Berbatov, starts to look like the New York Cosmos or whatever, right? So, but it's just a reminder that, and this is age, but there used to be room for more individuals. There used to be room for what I like about Berbatov, and as I say, it's not even necessarily my style of play. I loved watching Berbatov, but there's maybe other players I admire more. But what I do love about him, and what comes through in the interview, is that you're hearing and seeing someone who expressed something about himself as a footballer, who went on the pitch and used it as a way of expressing who he was. And I think that's been lost in football, where players who as individuals can communicate something about who they are, how they see the world, are being stamped out. The Ronaldinhos, the Riquelmes, but even the the big mad centre half who wants to play in a particular way. They're being stamped out as we're moving towards identikit footballers. So that's why I'm choosing Berbatov.
Well, hopefully the next evolution to compete with these identikit hyper-athletic footballers will be to get more of those individuals back in, and to have more of a maverick counter-surge, but they'll just have to be very fit.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maverick robots.
Villain of the week, one I'll let you help me with. David Moyes.
Wait a minute. Come on, you have to justify this now.
For allowing Idrissa Gueye to play Tottenham Hotspur in white pyjama bottoms. I never thought I would see the day a David Moyes team would include an example like that on a football pitch. Maybe it's a new stadium. Can you explain it, Johnny?
Oh, look, you're getting a bit Sean Dyche there, aren't you? You'll be banning snoods next. I'm not a fan of the white pajamas, of course. But I don't mind a man keeping warm. I mean, you know, he might be playing a beanie hat next, which would be a bit much. It does have a bit of a training game vibe to it. But no, I'm not going to go with that. I think they should just be a slightly different colour and less pajama-y. But man needs to keep warm. I'm happy with that.
Thank you, as always, for joining us on the Transfers podcast. It was a lot of fun.
Cheers. Love that.
You've been listening to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you liked what you heard, spread the word. Please follow, share and rate us. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter, Blue Sky and TikTok address is at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky at Duncan Castles. Jonathan is at J Northcroft. Our production is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. Ian McGarry, who left us and wasn't known for a couple of years. Duncan was old. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go.